Believe it or not, I know I'm already grinning, but I'm going to try to take this video serious because maybe, just maybe, there's one or two people that have watched this and maybe they didn't know, and maybe they'll get some new insight if I take this, if I try to contain my laughter here. First and foremost, big shout out to all of you guys for the continued support. We're closing in on 3.4 million for the ISOM. And we got them bagged and boarded right here for the ISOM. You got cover A, cover B here. But ISOM number 1 campaign. Still got some time. Go grab some items. You can still get cover C. And I appreciate all of you for the continued support. This is, man, it's been godsend, man. And we've been working. We will be spending a lot of August working. And I'll keep you guys posted. We will hopefully be starting our content series next week as well over at Rippaverse Comics YouTube, as well as our website, rippaverse.com. But on a serious note, guys, I know there's guys that don't like me, and I'm okay with that. I get it. But you don't actually listen to what it is that I say. You don't listen to what other people say on this very topic. And because of that, you get really confused even when you see, for example, with the Rippaverse stuff, and folks come out and they are very supportive of it. And you thought that our arguments were something that they were never, okay? And so you're distraught because you're like, well, wait a minute. You had this idea in your mind that people didn't like female characters or people didn't like black characters. And those that were making the complaints about be it tokenization or how they're used in these storylines or just being critical of the character itself, you deemed them as these racist or sexist or stuff of that nature. That was something that you made up in your head. That was never the argument that was actually being made. My social media manager joked about this. He's like, are we sure that these guys aren't actually working for us? It's like sometimes it's hard to tell because every new example of this, it highlights everything that I've been talking about over the years and why the Rippaverse is as successful as it is initially with our initial launch. We're completely, well, let's say this, we're not oblivious to the fact that this material has to be good. We're not owed your dollar and we have to keep you guys around. But our initial success can be explained by the fact that, well, the mainstream and a lot of really not just the mainstream, you even have the major indies that are adopting this idea that comics should be reflective of, and that's all of them, should be reflective of exactly real world politics. And it's so much so that it's predictable. Like every story has to have a panel or two that's dedicated to it in some way because activists now are the writers, right? The insane people control the asylum, as I always say. But the activists are the writers. And they have their own thing that they want to perpetuate. And because the leadership either are complicit in it or they're I don't know, powerless, or they're just giving into this mob of weirdos, that's what you got. And people have been turned off from modern comics. Yes, there's those that will act like they like this stuff. They'll pirate it. They'll tweet about it. But when it comes to actually being paying customers, they're not often there on the Wednesday to go get this book that we're going to be talking about today, which is Harley Quinn issue number 18. I saw this pop up on my feed and I had to verify it as real. And I'm going to get the whole panel for you in context because it is real. And it's quite hilarious that this is actually a thing. But I'll read it out to you. I have both 2 pages here. But this is an example of what everything it is that I've talked about. So Luke Fox, they are using him in this recent Harley Quinn book. This is issue number 18 of the current run of Harley Quinn. Yes, she's been rebooted. It's not the 2016 run that happened during the Rebirth stuff. This happened afterwards. So with Harley Quinn issue number 18, they have, and as a matter of fact, let me find out who is actually the writer of this really quick. See if there's anybody that we're aware of. We know that there was that one chick who was writing Harley Quinn, and she isn't fond of me, but she was writing that like Eat Bang Kill tour or whatever the deal is, T. Franklin, but that's not her. It looks like This one is being wrote by, let's see, Stephanie Phillips is the one that's writing this one. And so we have Luke Fox, who comes in, a.k.a. Batwing. You know, he is the son of Lucius Fox. And this is what Luke Fox says. So he comes in, Harley Quinn's fighting with some chick. And he says, well, basically he starts explaining stuff to Harley Quinn. And he says, if you follow me, Luke Fox that is, I will explain everything in terms of what's going on with whatever conflict. He says, I bought this house in an attempt to rethink my own legacy. I spent years trying to follow in the shadow of someone else's vision, wearing a costume to fight a war that wasn't mine. See, you can shoot Joker in the face, but it's harder to shoot issues like homophobia and systematic racism. That is such a random line that's thrown in there. And as he goes to explain during the next book or next page, it was just a random line that's in there. And I will reread it. See, you can shoot Joker in the face, but it's harder to shoot issues like homophobia or systemic racism. Now, imagine going to the comic book shop, picking this book up, and that's this panel right here in the bottom right, picking this book up, and you're like, wait a minute. If I wanted this type of rhetoric storyline where basically through the politics or social views of the writer, it's being funneled through Luke Fox, and he has some random line that I guess the writer had to get off of her chest. What the hell does that have to do with anything? But more importantly, why on earth would anybody that is looking to read comics for what they are, why would they want to read that? And that's the part that I think a lot of folks who don't like us and don't actually understand our arguments, they will continue to say, well, this represented that back in the day. They still are clinging on to this lie that the X-Men were created to represent like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, or rather that's the analogy or allegory or whatever. And Professor X and Magneto, which is, I've debunked that a million times. I have a video talking about exactly that, but they'll always say, well, it's always, politics have always been in books. And I'm not saying that there hasn't been real world things that crossed over into the politics. Crossed over into comic books, and you had that being presented. You can argue that there were some instances where it was just straight up propaganda. However, there's no balance in today's deal, and what's constantly being perpetuated as and I think this is the frustration with so many people, as the acceptable line of thinking or the heroic line of thinking is that of modern leftist kind of social justice ideals. I think you have far less people who would say things like get politics out of the comics. It's the fact that you're beating the audience over the head with it. And on top of that, it's one-sided. It's not like they're going to present in DC or Marvel for that matter. Let's say, even though like half of the voting population maybe more identifies with that, is conservatism, modern conservatism in a positive light. See, if you did that, and I'm not saying that they should do that. I'm just saying you would have less problems if people said they did that and then they had that, like where they would present it as a positive thing. But that's not what Marvel does. For example, I know this is DC Comics we're talking about, but I'm using this as an example. Barack Obama gets cover on The Amazing Spider-Man. All is good. Everybody's cheering hoorah. Barack Obama is, of course, never depicted in a negative light. And then you have, in the era Trump, for example, Trump is being depicted as MODOK, or he's being depicted as Joker like he was in that one Black Label comic book that we had talked about. See, that's the lack of balance. And I know they like to think of themselves as the only good guys. And I'm not saying that, again, I want to reiterate that, because I certainly wouldn't have real world politics, for example, in my books just be directly replicated in my book. I think that defeats the purpose of what it is that I'm trying to do. But when you're so heavy fisted and you're ramming this so nonsensically, it doesn't even make sense for the story that you're trying to tell. You're just sitting there trying to make your political or social views be represented by a character. Sometimes they're very beloved character, and they're just representative of you. It's a self-insert, but it doesn't even make sense for that character. It's one thing, I guess, to create a new one, but they're just using Luke Fox to be exactly that. And I'm willing to bet that position right there is the exact position that you probably can find the actual modern leftism via the writer if you went on a social media. So if you're confused by the enthusiasm for a project like myself and others, it's because, well, I've simply promised them to get to the essence of comic books and leaving this stuff out. Now, politics by literal definition, if you have a government present, it's going to be there. But there's a difference between beating your audience over the head with current real world politics in your books, slanted your way or whatever. It's one thing to do that, and it's so painfully obvious. So the great Stan Lee once said, he put social issues under land and plot, and he never wanted the audience to feel like he was beating them the reader over the head. If you took that approach, it'd be a far more different, but that's not what we have here. So the enthusiasm, it's a combined effort. Yeah, I presented something in the way that has people interested. They like the designs of the characters. They like the characters themselves in terms of what we gave them of a brief synopsis of the story, or they see the footage, or the pictures from us and our illustrators, and they like it. And yeah, we got to keep them around with the story. But that initial enthusiasm, if you read my code of ethics, for you guys that just don't seem to understand, if you read my code of ethics, you'll see that. Like when I say that, hey, I'm not interested in having stuff like this in my book. People are like, well, I'm glad. I'm happy. I just want to read. I just want to escape sometimes. And I don't want this to be a direct reflection of just the current politics of whatever writer. That a lot of folks don't want that. And I think what they have done is underestimated the people that are regular readers, or even people that want to get into comic books. And the fact that they don't read comics to sit up here and it be replicating MSNBC's like talking points. That's not why they're reading a comic in the first place. Often for so many people, it's not about simply highlighting and presenting their politics in a good light. It's more of they want to escape from that. But and I end on this note, like my social media manager said, as they keep doing this, I used to be one of those people that was like, you know what? I hate to see this, and I gripe about it and all that. And now I'm starting to lean towards more, well, I get to use this stuff as an example. And they're turning people off, which some of them end up becoming my own customers. It's kind of cool. But are we sure that they're not on our side because they're helping us, whether they know it or not? And whether they care, it ain't even about them caring. But on a serious note, for you guys that just simply don't understand is why the success is here, don't understand why people have their gripes about what's happening with modern entertainment, just read that panel and then look at something that's comparable. It's not about them being anti what they do. It's more of just simply not doing it, which at one point was the default.